who knows how long it would be before our country was settled, because they were the first ones here.
That's right.
The Spanish were here 50 to 55 years before the English came. They did not mistreat the natives. The unfortunate thing that happened as they moved among them for catechesis and for trade, the diseases, and we know this happened around the world, not just here. The diseases that the Spanish, we all carry within our system, was, I want to say, is those of us from European descent.
Yeah.
The natives here could not withstand, and they died from it. Like the measles, I had measles as a child. I'm still here.
Was it yellow fever, sister?
No, that was many years later.
Many years later.
Right. The measles, the chickenpox, and smallpox, and that's what's destroyed our native population.
And I remember when I studied U.S. history in high school, they said that the first settlement was Jamestown, but they never mentioned San Augustine.
See?
And why is that?
I think it's because we are not an original colony, and the 13 original colonies became the United States. We're the 27th state of the Union. In the South, this part was not well known. Also, the history books at the beginning were published up north because the publishing houses were up north. So it took people who knew the history here to make sure it started getting out. Now, our sisters came over from France, but they came right here to St. Augustine because the first bishop of St. Augustine invited us here. He needed education for the black people. So when I went to school, I was in Orlando, and I went to school to our sisters. So of course we were taught what the Spanish did for us. And so we were able to make it known, but we also had a Michael Gannon who became a professor of Florida history. And he was the first one that really made the Florida history well known. He wrote books, he gave talks, and he was a very interesting presenter. And he's actually been knighted by the King of Spain for all his work.
Wow.
But he was the first one, I think, that really researched and found out that the first Thanksgiving was here, not in Jamestown and Boston. And he was able to present this, and he also, by reading he learned the old Spanish. And he went back to in Madrid, where Father Lopez's diary was. He met the family because Pedro Menendez de Avala's family is still alive in Avalos. He went to their home, he read the old documents, and then he was able to write all about that. So he was able to bring the truth of what happened here out to people.
So, and do you think, you mentioned this teacher, do you think this kind of literature is going to change how the English or the American history has been told?
I hope so. I don't know if it'll do it right now because, unfortunately, our educational system has become very political in the public school systems. I'm hoping things will change and will be more accurate in what we're teaching. And if that's the case, then this should be taught, because even though Michael Gannon is 85, we have another young professor of history who has been over to Avalos in Madrid and Seville and read the old documents, can read the old Spanish, and who's really promoting the true history. But I think our situation in America right now is not the best, and we're hoping that we'll see some changes, and so that from what I hear of public school teachers, I was in Catholic schools, that the history has been kind of watered down. The Catholic schools try to maintain things that are accurate, but I'm just hoping that as we begin to go back to some of our roots and values, and I think having the 450 celebration here was one way to do that, that people begin to get interested in what is our country really about. And it's about what the Spanish did. Yes, the English are important because we use their form of government, their language, and I don't know if this country is more Protestant than Catholic, but can we not work together, not fight together, and build the country up? But also I think people have a misunderstanding of what we mean by separation of church and state. What they meant, like in Spain, the Catholic Church of Spain. You can't separate the Catholic Church from the Spanish people. It's not only their religion, it's also their culture. Whereas here, when we formed the United States, we said there'd be no official religion, that anyone could practice what faith they believed in. It didn't mean that religion couldn't flourish here, that it had to be controlled by the government, but that we would not say the Episcopal Church is the official religion, or the Catholic Church is the official religion, or the Baptist Church. We were not going to have that type of state unity with the church. We wanted people to be free to worship how they wanted to worship. And I think there's been a misunderstanding of that because there's more control over the churches now than there were when I was young. So I'm hoping that, again, if we go back, that's why we need to know our history. Because if you don't know your history, you either repeat the mistakes of the past or you make other mistakes because you don't understand what things are really about. And that's why the constitutions are so important. I think we need to go back and restudy our constitutions.
That's for sure. Also, the thing is that the Hispanic population, it seems now, is becoming really important, no? So
Right.
in a certain way, that's gonna allow to read another kind of a story
Right.
because of this Hispanic population, don't you
Right.
think?
That's what we're hoping for. There's values in the Spanish society that you would like to really see become more prevalent in the United States. Like on Pedro Menendez's coffin, now we have it, but we don't have it on top of the coffin. We have what we call the headboard. That's his family coat of arms. And that would have been placed on top of the coffin where his head would be lying inside. So people coming to pay respects to him, even if they couldn't read, they would know what those symbols meant. And they would know his family because he was a little aristocrat. The Spanish family was so important to the Spanish people. He wouldn't put his personal coat of arms up there. Also, they didn't, because of their love for family, the slaves would try to escape from the English colonies and come here because they never separated families, whereas the English would separate child from mother and husband and wife. The Spanish didn't do that, and the Spanish were much better to their slaves. They did have slaves, and the first Bishop of St. Augustine for a long time supported slavery till he began to feel, no, we shouldn't do that. But he also exhorted, if that's the right word, that the slave owners were to be very good to their slaves. So the idea of slavery and how they were treated by the Spanish was very different than other nations.
Also, you were talking that it seems that American history has been told from east to west.
Right.
And now it seems that also there is another story
It's
from
starting
south to north,
right,
no?
Right, and,
So,
right, and the northern part of the country, of course, developed with industries. The southern part was more of, I want to say, pastoral farming lands, cattle, cotton fields, plantations, and that's, I hate to say it, it's basically probably why we lost the war between the states, is we didn't have the factories that made the bullets and the guns and all that, because we weren't that type of part of the country. We weren't the manufacturing part of the country. But the publishing houses were also up north. And because I know I was teaching first grade one year, and we had to give them these standardized tests, where there were pictures of children with sleigh and snow. Our children were here in the South. They didn't see snow. So I think that's just a symbol of saying that, yes, things came more from the north down to the South, and the South wasn't important. All of a sudden we became politically important because all of a sudden we were having a larger population here. And so now the South has become important. And I think that's having an influence too. Because there's a migration of people from the northern states down here to the southern states now. And so that's why I think the museum and our shrine here that the Spanish built for us is important, because now we have a chance to share, I want to say, the real history of how the United States started. Jamestown, yes, that is important. That's one of the early English foundations. And so is Boston, but we were here 50 years before. And I think people need to realize that it started here with the Spanish. Now, Ponce de Leon was not looking for the Fountain of Youth. That's a myth. He was looking for the Island of Bimini, and he sighted Florida. 50 years later, the king commissions Pedro Menendez to come here to find a permanent lasting settlement. They had tried 3 times in Florida, twice on the Gulf side. The Indians drove them off. But in Pensacola on the Gulf side, a hurricane destroyed it before they were finished. But they still wanted his presence here, mainly because the French had put a fort in Jacksonville area, and this was definitely Spanish territory. But our location was important. But with the Spanish always came the priest. And so you always had that presence of the church, or God. And now I'm saying that God came also with the English. But, and like I said, but the Spanish came to share their faith.
And the other thing is the importance of the mission in order to integrate the Indians and the natives.
Right,
no?
right.
That's
Definitely.
another important
Very
thing,
important. No? And a lot of the missions also had forts at them, but the Franciscans were so wanting the natives to be Christian from the heart. They didn't even want soldiers in those forts. They wanted to make sure, and they learned the native language so that they could teach them religion from the heart. But And the catechesis was very important to them because they certainly took that command of Christ, go forth and teach all nations. And I think wherever the Spanish went, they probably did that for the natives. They tried to share their faith. And it wasn't forced upon them. I had someone say, well, they had to become Catholic. I said, no, they didn't have to. It was their choice. They were not going to be killed if they didn't become Catholic. As far as I know, they weren't going to be killed. That's why they learned the language, so they could be Catholic from the heart. And to me, that speaks a lot of respect that the Spanish had for these strange-looking people that they hadn't met before. Because these people here were taller than they were, their skin was darker, they wore their hair differently, they dressed differently, but they still were there to live with them. Pedro Menendez spent a lot of his time going to the different villages along the coast here and making alliances with the chiefs so that the Spanish and natives could live together in peace. So he wasn't out to control the natives. And that this was Spanish territory, but these people were here long before the Spanish came. And I think that the Spanish must have had a respect for that. So I think,